Hi, I'm Kayla, and today I'm going to be presenting my project in which I conducted an analysis of gendered language in Olympic equestrian coverage. I'm going to begin today with a short video.
Well, if any man in this field should get inside the time in his normal tempo, it would be Kevin Stout, because he's always going somewhere, always travelling.
The commentators compare Kevin Stout to any man in the field. The thing is, there weren't only men in that class. Women were also competing against Stout that day. This comment connects to a broader question about gender equity in sports. We've seen the movement for gender equity in sports grow in recent years, from the US women's national soccer team advocating for equal pay to the outrage over the lack of a weight room at the 2021 NCAA women's college basketball tournament. These ideas connect to a broader historical trend surrounding women in sports, where women were seen as the weaker sex and therefore biologically incapable of participating in sport. A supposed understanding of the biological differences between men and women continues to shape the organization of modern sport, where men and women often compete separately. We see then that differences in the styles of play between men's and women's sports could contribute to differences in how these sports are covered by the media. But what happens when men and women compete together? Equestrian sports are the only sports in the Olympics in which men and women compete directly against one another. American Equestrian has quantitative parity. Both the 2012 and 2016 Olympic show jumping teams consisted of 2 men and 2 women. So we see that there is this quantitative parity, but is there qualitative parity in how these sports are covered? I will argue that the coverage of Olympic equestrian sports reflects and reinforces gendered social norms. I observe this reinforcement on 3 primary levels. The first is the emotional level, in which female equestrians are framed as feeling emotion more intensely than their male counterparts. Next, female equestrians are described in relation to the men to whom they're connected, while men are described as independent. Finally, coverage emphasizes that even though men and women compete together, the presence of female equestrians at the Olympics is perceived as deviating from the male norm. This perpetuation of gender stereotypes in coverage of equestrian sports indicates that quantitative or competitive equity between men and women does not free women from the enforcement of sexist social values. Before we're able to understand the significance of the gendered rhetoric in the media coverage of equestrian sports, it's critical to explore established connections and conversations about gender, equestrian sports, and media coverage. From there, we'll then look at some video clips and excerpts from news articles that indicate the reinforcement of gender stereotypes in the 3 ways outlined previously. There have been several scholars of equestrian sports focusing primarily on recreational equestrian. Adelman and Plymouth argue that equestrian expertise is gendered, where men are experts in horsemanship and women are understood to be students of the craft. Dashper posits that female equestrians are systematically disadvantaged in their pursuit of athletic success. None of these scholars, however, have studied how media coverage of high-level equestrian competitions shapes the understanding of female equestrians and their achievements. Here, it's important to note that participants in equestrian sports in the United States are overwhelmingly white and often wealthy. There has never been a Black athlete on a US Olympic equestrian team. As such, female equestrian athletes are likely to be framed according to expectations of white, middle-class femininity. Scholars have also studied gendered media coverage of the Olympics. Poniatowski found that in the 2010 Winter Olympics, female hockey players were framed as inferior, emotional, and dependent compared to their superior and independent male counterparts. On the other hand, Hardin argues that Olympic media coverage is fair, since we cannot expect media coverage to be gender equitable if the sports themselves are not gender equitable. These sources disagree surrounding the perpetuation of gender stereotypes on the part of the media. As such, an analysis of the media coverage of equestrian events, which are supposedly gender equitable, would provide an insight as to the role the media plays in communicating gender difference to its audience. I'm now going to move into an analysis of equestrian coverage. In this analysis, we'll see the perpetuation of gender stereotypes through descriptions of emotions, relationships, and the male norm in two distinct forms of coverage, specifically color commentary and written news articles. Color commentary is commentary on sports broadcasts that provides supplemental information about the athletes and their performance. By looking at color commentary, we can get an understanding of the rhetoric that surrounds athletes while they're directly competing. Written news articles, on the other hand, are more deliberate in the storylines that they craft for their readers and therefore play a role in guiding their readers' thinking. We're first going to focus on color commentary. Looking at how the emotions of female athletes are portrayed, here we see Lucy Davis, described by commentators as she competes for the US show jumping team.
Well, Lucy certainly looks cool, calm, and collected, but you can believe those butterflies are churning in her stomach. She has a super round jumping clears in team competition. She had 7 of 8 clear rounds to help be selected for this Olympic team.
Butterflies would be natural given the circumstance, but especially since Lucy is just 23 years old.
They mention her butterflies, emphasizing a presence of nerves that are absent in male athletes. The commentators make clear that Davis's age and potential inexperience are not the only determining factors behind nervous emotions for her, implicitly communicating to their audience that her nerves are notable precisely because she is a woman. Right after the conclusion of the previous clip, commentators go on to describe Davis's relationship with her grandfather.
Her horse Baron, named after her grandfather. His middle name, that's Bob Freeze, a former top-level jockey agent in thoroughbred racing, who first encouraged her to take riding lessons.
In speaking about Davis's grandfather and his influence on her career in sport, the commentators work to disregard Davis's agency. The comment implies that her success is not just a product of her own ability and hard work, but can be credited, at least partially, to a male relative. Finally, as we saw in the video at the beginning of this presentation, color commentators emphasize the fact that male competitors are seen as the default in competition. Let's watch that clip again now.
Well, if any man in this field should get inside the time in his normal tempo, it would be Kevin Stroud, because he's always going somewhere, always traveling.
The generalized field of competitors is coded as male, despite the presence of female equestrians like Lucy Davis in the competition. Women are blatantly left out and disregarded. We're now going to move on to an analysis of written news coverage. One article from the FEI, the governing body of international equestrian sports, summarizes the important moments from the 2016 Olympics and the emotions of the victorious athletes. The all-male gold medal winning eventing team is described as on a high after their victory, while a female dressage gold medal winner is described as not being able to hold back her tears. Here, both the male and female athletes are described as feeling emotion, but those emotions are presented in a vastly different manner. The men are joyful, but that joy is stoic and controlled. The woman, on the other hand, is decidedly out of control of her emotions. Prior to the 2016 Olympics, Sports Illustrated published a ones-to-watch article about equestrian athletes. In it, they described Beezy Madden, who rode for the US show jumping team, but one sentence of the 3-sentence blurb about her is dedicated to her male teammates. She's described as competing with the help of jumping teammates McLean Ward and Kent Farrington, ranked 3rd and 5th by the International Equestrian Federation, respectively. Here, Madden is framed through her relationship to her male teammates. Madden's own world ranking is not mentioned, and teammate Lucy Davis is disregarded. The official website of the Olympics also published an article about equestrian performances in the 2016 Olympics with the headline, "Olympic Queen Isabel Worth secures double gold on miracle horse Bella Rose." Here, the anonymous author of the article uses the gendered term queen to describe Worth. There are no comparable articles in which a male athlete is referred to as a king, indicating that this language is meant to reflect Worth as deviating from a masculine athletic norm. This analysis of Olympic equestrian coverage indicates that the media's framing of female athletes according to traditional gender roles is not the result of differences between men's and women's sports, but rather persists even in sports in which men and women compete directly. Overall, we saw that the coverage of male and female equestrian athletes differed in 3 central categories. They described women as more emotional, dependent on male relationships, and as outsiders in the athletic space. In framing female athletes using gender stereotypes, the media works to delegitimize them and their achievements. With this, it's clear that gender integration alone is not sufficient for achieving gender equity in sport, but a recognition of the role that the media plays in enforcing traditional gender norms is critical for understanding the steps that we need to take to elevate female athletes and their achievements. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day.